Good evening, all. We will be starting in 2 minutes. Thanks for your patience.
I'm going to go ahead and get started, you guys. Thank you so much for taking a seat. All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the EIR Scoping meeting for the Millbrae and Burlingame Shoreline Area Protection and Enhancement Project. My name is McKenna Wong, and I am a project manager at OneShoreline, which is the CEQA lead agency for this project. And I'll go ahead and introduce a few others in the room who are our project partners and members of the consultant team, just so you know who they are. From the city of Millbrae, which is a project partner with OneShoreline, we have Armando Mora, just sitting in the back row here, with the Department of Public Works at the city. Our design consultant, Schaffen Wheeler, is also in the room tonight. Chuck Anderson will be joining us, and he'll also be available after the presentations and after the meeting closes out for any questions that you might have at the posters. Syed Murtuza just walked in. He's with the City of Burlingame, Department of Public Works. And we also have our consultant represented here that's helping support OneShoreline and drafting the CEQA EIR. That's Kelsey Bennett here with Rincon, and then Michael Huang is out in the front collecting your comment cards. So feel free to turn those in to him once he is at the stage. I'll talk through a few notes of our agenda. So we'll start off with a welcome by Donna Colson, who is the Vice Mayor of the City of Burlingame and also a member of OneShoreline's Board of Directors. Then Kelsey and I will walk through a presentation on the CEQA process and the proposed project, and then we'll open up the comment period to receive verbal comments both in person and then remotely via Zoom. And then after that period is over, we'll go ahead and close the meeting. And then for those of us who are here in person in this room, feel free to join Chuck and I at the posters afterwards if you have any questions, and we can have a discussion there. And some other notes for those of us here in person, just logistics about the room. Exit is right here, closest exit is right here going out to the patio. There's also an exit when you go out these doors to the left. Bathrooms are out these doors to the right. Water is also out the doors to the left. With that, I'll go ahead and welcome Vice Mayor Colson to the podium. She's been a critical local champion for this project. Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome. Thank you, McKenna. So I just want to welcome everyone here tonight. Thank you all for giving up a Thursday night. This is a really important project for Burlingame and Millbrae. For those of you who are familiar with our Bayfront, over 40% of our city sales tax through our transit occupancy tax, which is our hotel occupancy tax, is related to projects that are all down on the Bayfront. So protecting those assets, as well as our wastewater treatment plant, several parks and recreation facilities, as well as the Bay Trail, has always been a really imperative part of the work that we've been doing here in Burlingame. It just so happened we were big supporters of getting OneShoreline going. We represent the North County. I'm the representative for the North County here. And I really want to thank McKenna and Len Matterman, who could not be here today, he had a medical emergency, for the leadership they've given, because they were the ones who've gone out and helped us secure the state level appropriation from Kevin Mullen's office to help us scope this project and figure out how to protect the Bay Shore And this project and the zoning that has been associated with it has really been kind of a model for other cities throughout the county to go ahead and replicate. And for example, East Palo Alto right now is looking at, trying to figure out similar type zoning and opportunities. So it's a critical project for us. We really appreciate your feedback. We want you to be here today. Again, this is just a scoping for what will go into the EIR. This isn't exactly what's going to happen. It's really just to study the opportunities that we might have. So I hope everyone can remember that. That's a really important distinction today is, again, we are not scoping a specific project. We're scoping opportunities, and we want to make sure all the questions get answered that you might have in the EIR. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey Bennett from Rincon Planning, who is going to kick us off on the presentation. Thank you, Kelsey. And I'm going to sit in the audience just so I can see a little better, but if you need anything, let me know.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep, okay. Hi, my name is Kelsey Bennett, and I'm an Environmental and Sustainability Planning Director with Rincon Consultants. As McKenna mentioned, Rincon Consultants will be conducting the environmental analysis of the proposed project via preparation of an environmental impact report, or an EIR for short, pursuant to the law that we call the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA for short. I wanted to go over what the purpose of this evening's meeting is. So this is an environmental impact report public scoping meeting, and with the focus being to share the scope of the EIR, an overview of the proposed project, opportunities for your public input now and in the future, and most importantly, to accept public EIR scoping comments themselves. So just to give you a little context on the regulatory CEQA purpose, under the purpose of environmental review under CEQA is to state who the CEQA lead agency is. In this case, it is I'm going to give you the long name here first, the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District, right? And so we are calling that OneShoreline for short. And then also to disclose the environmental impacts of the proposed project, including any potentially significant impacts, identify ways to avoid or reduce such identified environmental impacts through the report process, consider feasible EIR alternatives to the project, and to fold public participation and input into the overall planning process itself. And these steps will be taken as part of preparation of the draft EIR over the next few months for the proposed project. So this slide demonstrates the CEQA steps and opportunity for public input. Specifically today, we are at the top middle box on this chart, which is the EIR public scoping meeting itself. The EIR public scoping period is required to last 30 days, but OneShoreline opted to actually lengthen that to provide a 37-day input period, with the final day for submittal of written comments for EIR scoping comments on November 15th. In addition, future opportunity for public input also exists during the circulation of the draft EIR itself, which is represented by the middle box on this slide. That will be for a period of at least 45 days long, during which both written comments on the draft EIR could be submitted, and also another set of verbal comments could be provided at another public meeting on the draft EIR itself. So just a reminder for these CEQA steps and opportunity for public input, the EIR notice of preparation is available at the website listed on the top of this slide, and the EIR public scoping period, again, lasts until November 15th. With the corresponding EIR public scoping meeting being this meeting that we are currently in as we speak this evening on November 2nd at the Burlingame Community Center. And now I'm going to turn it back over to McKenna, who's going to go over a summary of who the CEQA lead agency OneShoreline is themselves, the project history, project objectives, and project features.
Thank you, Kelsey. Just want to check that those on Zoom can hear if I'm this distance from the mic, looking in the back for affirmation. Okay, great. Okay, yeah, so as Kelsey mentioned, I'll just give a little bit more context on OneShoreline and why we were created, and then I'll transition and talk a little bit more about the proposed project, which is why we're here tonight. So Before 2020, the primary agency that was tasked with the issue of flooding in San Mateo County was a flood control district. Minimize this real quick. That collected taxes in 4 very distinctly defined flood zones throughout the county. Those flood zones covered about 10% of the land area in the county, barely touched the Bay shoreline, that's that map here on the left hand of the slide, and had no jurisdiction over the Pacific coast side of San Mateo County. So when given the transformative impacts of sea level rise and flooding in San Mateo County specifically, given that we're on the peninsula and there's hazards coming from the San Francisco Bay side as well as the Pacific coast side, a lot of this vulnerability was assessed in a sea level rise vulnerability assessment conducted by the county in 2018. It became very clear very quickly that climate change is a transformative challenge that the county and the cities were not well positioned to address individually, and that there was a call for a countywide agency that could work across jurisdictional boundaries and really address the issue of sea level rise head on and urgently. And with that, state legislation established OneShoreline on January 1st, 2020. We are the first independent government agency in the state of California that is focused on building resilience to the water-related impacts of climate change. We look to take a holistic approach in 3 main areas. So first, threats. With a lot of our work, we look at flooding, sea level rise, coastal erosion, and stormwater. We also look to take a holistic approach to geography, and this is really the heart of why we were created, is to facilitate collaboration across jurisdictional lines and between jurisdictions and asset owners like San Francisco International Airport, which is located in San Mateo County. And we also look to take a holistic approach to our objectives. Flood protection is really at the core of a lot of our projects. But we also prioritize habitat, recreation, connectivity, and community enhancement in all of our work. We have 4 primary priorities currently. First, our projects, one of which we're here to discuss tonight. These are regional sea level rise infrastructure projects. A huge focus of our work is on the San Francisco Bay shoreline of the county, given that it's heavily urbanized land built out into the bay, low lying, very vulnerable to any increase in bay water level. And the term that we use for the portfolio of projects along the bay shoreline of San Mateo County is OneShoreline's Bay Program. The purpose of this program is to align and connect the protection and enhancement along the entire 53 miles of the San Mateo County Bay shoreline. And what does this mean? This looks like stitching together projects led by others, like SFO, or the Foster City Levee project that you might be familiar just was completed, and Chuck led that project. Stitching together projects led by others, as well as projects led by OneShoreline to establish this contiguous line of protection against sea level rise along the county shoreline, or OneShoreline, right? That's the full branding coming full circle. Second priority is focused on planning. We work with cities throughout San Mateo County on prioritizing sea level rise and flood resilience into their planning policies and their zoning practices. So as new developments come to these cities and look for permits and approvals, we look to incorporate sea level rise resilience into the approvals of those new projects, particularly new shoreline projects. So they're not only building in site-specific resilience for that specific development, but also resilience that contributes to regional resilience. There's 2 photos here underneath this heading. One illustrating both good and bad examples of this. You'll see the photo on the left-hand side is really an image of a missed opportunity. This is a multifamily housing development located right on the bay shoreline, and you'll see that path that goes right along those units is right on the bay. So not only is it at risk of imminent flooding, they probably flood during king tides. That's the highest tide of the year. They probably flood during king tides now. You also, when you think about adaptation to long-term sea level rise, our options are really limited at this property. You can maybe squeeze in a flood wall on that sliver of land on the bay side of that path, but that's really not an ideal solution. It would block views, cut off access to the bay. That's really not what we want climate adaptation to look like. And that's in contrast to the development on the right. Set back from the bay shoreline, there's some public access along the bay between that development and the water. So it's really thinking about how do land use decisions that we make today impact our abilities and our opportunities to scope out adaptation to sea level rise in the future. Third priority are storms. We focus on alerting people to and reducing the impacts of climate-driven atmospheric rivers like we experienced in San Mateo County this past winter. And we're also focused on the long-term sustainability of OneShoreline and our efforts, developing ongoing funding streams from both the public and private sectors so that all sectors see climate resilience as their issue, as a priority that is worth their investment. Okay, I'll start to transition a little bit into the project that we're here to discuss tonight and a little bit of project history. So, San Francisco International Airport. This is a key segment of San Mateo County's Bay Shoreline. SFO has been planning a shoreline protection program, is the name of their project, to protect the airport from the 100-year storm with 3.5 feet of sea level rise. And given the many flood-prone communities located in San Mateo County that are located just adjacent to the airport, either to the north or the south, or tucked in right behind the airport on the inland side, OneShoreline has been very focused on aligning and advancing local efforts so that we could leverage this project, tie into SFO's project to the north and south, and create that contiguous line of shoreline protection that I mentioned earlier as part of the Bay program. So those green arrows are illustrating those potential tie-ins going to the north and south, and tonight we'll be focused on that tie-in to the south of the airport along the Millbrae and Burlingame shoreline. So while SFO was planning its project in recent years, the cities of Burlingame and Millbrae were also actively planning for sea level rise. They both released reports in 2019 and 2020, assessing their vulnerability to sea level rise and scoping out initial adaptation solutions. And this was a really strong foundation for OneShoreline to then take those reports and turn it into its first regional sea level rise project when it was established in 2020. In 2022, we got some critical state funding that allowed us to jumpstart the project, and then we issued a request for proposals to bring on a consultant team to now begin our project development process. And since the summer of 2022, that team, along with OneShoreline, has completed a series of data collection reports and efforts that ultimately culminated in that last bullet at the bottom of the slide, the conceptual alternatives feasibility analysis that then informed the proposed project that was in the notice of preparation that we're here to discuss tonight. So this project has 3 primary objectives. First, coastal flood protection. As you can see in that image, right now, on a sunny day during a high tide in Burlingame and in Millbrae, we have about 1 foot of play above king tide today before you start to see that water encroach on the Bay Trail and flood properties that are adjacent to the shoreline. That 1 foot will disappear pretty quickly. During a storm event, when storm surge happens and those bay water levels rise a little bit higher, or with 1 foot of sea level rise, that 1 foot buffer will be gone pretty quickly. A lot of properties are also currently in the FEMA floodplain along the Millbrae and Burlingame shoreline, which means that they're required to purchase flood insurance. And most of that flooding that creates that FEMA floodplain, it comes from coastal flooding, meaning that water originates in San Francisco Bay and is projected to come inland. The second primary project objective is public access and recreation. How can we enhance the shoreline experience today and in the future for the public? This photo illustrates a segment of the Bay Trail. There are parts of the Bay Trail along this whole part of the Millbrae and Burlingame shoreline, but there's also gaps in that Bay Trail that we're looking to close. But even with this part of the Bay shoreline, or the Bay Trail that's shown in this image, you can see there's opportunities for enhancement. There's a lot of that rubble from the old San Mateo Bridge that was used to create this land. There's opportunities to remove that and maybe further enhance the shoreline, which leads me to our last project objective focused on habitat. As I mentioned, before this land was created using bay fill in the 1960s, much of this area was historically tidal marsh and mudflats. Today, pretty much most of that marsh is now lost. Unfortunately, there is some mudflat that remains, but with sea level rise, that mudflat will also be lost. Those low tides will not expose the bay bottom any longer, and it'll just be open water. So a key focus of this project is how can we promote meaningful habitat elements that are sustainable and adaptable to sea level rise over time. And in this next slide, I'll dive in a little bit deeper into the coastal flood protection objective. So there are three primary coastal flood protection benefits of the project. First, as I've highlighted earlier, the project seeks to protect the shoreline itself against high bay water levels that occurred from sea level rise, storm surge, waves, or a combination of all the three. The project also seeks to keep higher bay water levels from the creeks and open up space in the creeks. And this is a really key point. This increases the effectiveness of the city storm drain system. So when rain falls and that water needs to drain through creeks and get out into the bay, by keeping higher bay water levels out of those creeks, it allows more space for that drainage to occur. So this is illustrated when I compare the current 100-year floodplain to what we're modeling the post-project floodplain will look like. So you'll see that animation is a little laggy, but after the project is constructed, we anticipate that the majority of that 100-year floodplain will be addressed. But you'll also notice that there's still some remaining spots, right, where flooding remains. And those are locations where there are likely constraints in the local storm drain system that are undersized, and they're not able to effectively convey 100-year flows out to the creeks and get to the bay. This project is not looking to replace entire segments of the city storm drain networks, so this work would need to be led by the individual cities. But this project really pushes forward a substantial benefit by addressing all the water that is coming from the San Francisco Bay. That leads me to our third benefit, which we have done a lot of work completing regional studies of the area, looking at both coastal flood hazards and inland flood hazards, and that lays a strong foundation for future work, including each city's storm drain master plan that they update every few years. Okay, how did we get to our proposed project that was presented in the notice of preparation? Well, we started with 5 conceptual alternatives. This was ultimately consolidated down to 3 conceptual alternatives, and I'll walk through those with you. So first, conceptual alternative number 1 proposed a shoreline barrier along the Millbrae and Burlingame shoreline, as well as flood walls that chased that bay water all the way up the creeks up to approximately the Caltrain tracks. Conceptual alternative number 2 replaced those creek flood walls and proposed tide gates and pump stations at the mouth of every creek to prevent bay water from going up the creek channels, but it kept an onshore shoreline barrier to protect from high bay water levels. And then conceptual alternative number 3 took that onshore barrier and moved it offshore. As part of this alternative, we proposed tide gates and a pump station to allow for tidal circulation. And we also explored optional tie-ins, both at the Coyote Point in the city of San Mateo, as well as an optional tie-in at the SFO runway. But you'll still see that there's a purple line along the shoreline in this alternative, and that's to include shoreline access and recreation enhancements as needed. For example, closing those gaps in the Bay Trail that I mentioned earlier. We still want to be able to provide those enhancements as part of the project. And this is just illustrating that those tide gates will open and close. I'll elaborate a little bit on this in my last slide. So then we took those 3 primary conceptual alternatives and we completed a conceptual alternatives feasibility analysis. The purpose of this analysis was just to assess on a preliminary level those 3 alternatives that I just went through according to 9 criteria, a whole list of criteria just to see essentially a fatal flaw analysis. Those criteria included the ability to meet project objectives, those 3 objectives I mentioned earlier, coastal protection, public access, habitat. What's the logistical feasibility of these alternatives? What are their land use impacts? And a whole list of criteria. There are 3 main takeaways from this report, and this was very important leading up to this NOP. The conceptual alternative 1 was deemed infeasible for many reasons, primarily due to substantial land use impacts due to those flood walls that go up the creek channels. Those have a high cost and schedule implications. Alternative 1 also had very limited habitat and public access benefits, and it was the least adaptable to sea level rise over time. Once you install those flood walls, they're pretty much there, and it's hard to move over time. Second takeaway was that conceptual alternative 3 rose to the top. It was recommended for further evaluation through the CEQA process. And so therefore, conceptual alternative 3 is the proposed project, and conceptual alternative 2, that's the alternative that replaces the flood walls along the creeks with tide gates and pump stations at the mouths of every creek, that will be assessed as an EIR alternative. Okay. So I'm going to elaborate a bit further on the proposed project, starting with the offshore features. So the proposed offshore flood barrier in the proposed project, which could support a living seawall or potentially host a trail on some segments, extends from San Francisco International Airport's proposed sea level rise protection project all the way to the southeast corner of the shoreline in Burlingame. As an option, this barrier could be extended to high ground at Coyote Point in the city of San Mateo. The barrier would have a series of tide gates or doors, and that's what these gaps in that offshore barrier represent. During extreme storms and tides, these doors would be closed to keep the tide out and to create space for storm runoff that comes down the 5 creeks that drain to this shoreline during storms. So they could be closed. But outside of these extreme events, the doors would be kept open to allow for normal tidal action and watershed drainage that is really critically important to these shoreline habitats today. As sea levels rise in the coming years, these doors will be closed more frequently and for longer periods of time. And I'll walk through a few scenarios of what that could look like. So today, with no sea level rise, these doors would pretty much be open all the time during the average day. They may be closed a few times during the year, maybe during king tide, like I mentioned, that's the highest tide of the year, or during extreme storms. With 1.5 feet of sea level rise, these doors would be open except for maybe 30 minutes during the peak high tide of every day. High tide occurs twice a day, 30 minutes plus 30 minutes, about an hour total over the course of an average day. With 3 feet of sea level rise, these doors would be open except for 3.5 hours during the high tide, twice a day, so that's 7 hours total per day. That's about 30% of the time they will be closed with 3 feet of sea level rise. And with 6 feet of sea level rise, which is a very long-term scenario, these doors would be open 50% of the time, closed 50% of the time. So that's kind of an example of how that progression will take place as sea levels rise over time. And then just to speak towards the shoreline features of the project, to further achieve our project objectives, the proposed project may also construct these shoreline features that are represented in this orange line, such as trails, beaches, habitat, levees, walls, bridges, tide gates, and pump stations. And I'll now pass it back to Kelsey to discuss some of the topics we plan to analyze in the EIR and to open up the period of public comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, McKenna. So back to the EIR. The EIR approach will be to assess the project level environmental impacts. And this analysis would be based on things like the proposed project location, as well as the proposed features and components information. And the focus would be on reasonably foreseeable physical environmental impacts that could occur during either construction or operation long-term of the project itself. And then ultimately to evaluate EIR alternatives in a manner that is required by CEQA. So in terms of the scope of the EIR will analyze all the CEQA guidelines Appendix G topics shown on the slide at both the project and the cumulative level. So there are both natural resource topics that will be analyzed, natural resource topics with regard to things like effects on the ecosystem, such as biological resources, greenhouse gas or GHG emissions, and hydrology and water quality, to speak to a few, as well as social resource topics with regard to effects on humans, which include things like air quality, noise, and transportation. For the projected EIR schedule, this EIR public scoping period will last through November 15th, and then the draft EIR is anticipated to be released sometime in fall 2024, with a draft EIR public meeting also being held during that period of time for public review and comment. So just wanted to reiterate, we welcome your public comments on the scope of the EIR itself. Please submit any written comments. Yeah, feel free to take a picture of the screen right here. The information, the instructions on it, how to submit written comments by the 15th to McKenna at the mailing or the email address shown on the slide. Please include EIR scoping comment and then the name of the project in the subject line. And then finally, for more information in general about OneShoreline and the project, please visit the OneShoreline website listed at the bottom of the slide. And if you forget to get a picture of the slide, you can also take a picture of this information that's taped on the front desk out front where the sign-in desk was. So, and with that, we'll start taking public comments on the scope of the EIR. First, we're going to take in-person comments for folks here in the room, and then online comments after that. If you'd like to provide in-person verbal comments and you haven't already, please hand a comment card to Michael here, over here with his hand raised, over there, and please come up to the podium right here. The mic's already on for you to make your comments when you are called on, and I will do the best to pronounce everyone's names as best I can. And for those who would like to provide online verbal comments, go ahead whenever you get a chance to raise your hand in Zoom online, and you'll be called on when it's your turn to speak. Again, thanks for your patience because we're going to take comments from folks here in person in the room first. And in order to give everyone an opportunity to provide comment, we're going to limit each commenter to a maximum of 3 minutes per speaking period. And then finally, I just wanted to reiterate that we'd like to keep the comments and the speech respectful, and that hateful and disrespectful speech won't be tolerated. And it's also not in line with the values of OneShoreline nor our host this evening, the city of Burlingame. So I just wanted to speak to that. And with that, I'll start calling people up to the podium for your comments. Oh, we just have one. Okay. All right. So we have Eric Lenham.
Hi, I'm Eric Lenane. I'm a kite surfer, windsurfer, and wingboarder, and I don't represent, we're kind of a loosely affiliated group that use Coyote Point quite a bit, as well as in Foster City. We were recently impacted by the Foster City seawall pretty significantly over a period of last year. This project effectively cuts off wind sports at Coyote Point in the planned Bay Rise Park. It puts a barrier in front of it. If you look at the proposed barrier, it goes across a very popular windsurfing and kite surfing area. It causes us great concern in that we can maybe comment about this, but we don't know how to actually change the process. We would probably like to have some sort of alternative that encompasses the type of barriers that you're looking for, but carves out those recreation areas that we've been using for the last 30 years. So that's kind of where we're at. We want to help understand that process to see if we can have any level of impact on that. I don't speak for everybody, but I know that first thing popped up in my mind is that, first Facebook went up, destroyed the wind in that area, and secondly, now we're beginning to see our access cut off, and it's a very serious issue for us. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Kelsey, you'll need to stop sharing your screen up there so we can share the timer. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Thank you, Genius Bar. Okay, next, Amy Chung.
Hi, I represent Anzaco LLC. We own the property at 615 Airport Boulevard. It's Anza Parking Corporation. We abut the lagoon right next to Airport Boulevard and across from Highway 101. And we're curious what kind of outreach you've done to the people that have been operating businesses along these areas all along, because I don't recall, we've owned this property for over 50 years. We don't recall ever having talked to anybody about what we do without anybody else's help to deal with storms, king tides, and all of that. And my second question has to do with the proposals and alternatives. Who's going to pay for this? And if it affects our property rights up against the shore, and if they in fact do affect our property rights, who's going to pay for it?
Thank you for your comment. Do we have any other in-person comments here? Thank you. Andrea Papajohn?
Yes. Hi, I'm Andrea Papajohn. I live in the city of Burlingame, and I thank you for your presentation. I just have a personal interest in this, and I was just curious about the concept 3 and the tide gates being open and closed twice a day. I was just curious about, if that's open and closed so often, how are they maintained? Are there other examples of where tide gates are used so frequently? And is there any potential for them being, damaged? And then how would they be maintained? And then how would that be funded? I fully support OneShoreline in your project. I was just curious if you had any answer to that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Anyone else in the room wanted to provide comments? Okay, with that, let's go to folks online. And since we don't have the benefit, folks online, of having a speaker card with your name spelled out, if you could start with saying your name and if you're affiliated with any organization or agency clearly at the beginning before you provide your comments. Thank you.
And I'm happy to try to butcher their name as well.
Yeah,
I'll
thank you.
try to keep track of comments as they've come in. As Kelsey just mentioned, now is the time for individuals that are attending this meeting remotely to pose questions. You may use the raise hand feature. And as I mentioned, I will attempt to call on folks in the order that they come in. We will start with Jeffrey Finn. I'll give you the opportunity to speak, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, well, thank you for your public service. I'm speaking as a private individual. I already sent an email comment before I had your rundown, so I now have more information. My main concern or priority is minimal recreational requirements for kiteboarding and windsurfing for safety, which the BCDC is aware about. And that plays into my wondering how you're going to work with the State Coastal Conservancy, incorporate the Bay Trail, not just the Bay Trail, but the Bay Water Trail. And just how you're going to work conflicts with different government agencies. And then I think about Burlingame and 415 Burlingame that gave the State Lands Commission, just gave to the city of Burlingame, that's going to be used for a park. And I'd like to see soft armoring as opposed to a big, long, 2.8 mile long hard armored dock. And if you close those gates, that water's got to go somewhere. So the water's got to rise somewhere else. And I wonder how it's going to affect the bay currents and the movement of sand, the whole hydrology of the bay. And those are some my concerns. And thank you for your public service. I appreciate that. That's it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Gotta account for potential buffering online, right? So just make sure you're actually done. All right, thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. Next up is Gail Rabe. I'll give you the opportunity to speak. You'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Gail Robbie, co-chair of Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge, a regional environmental group that advocates for the ecological health of San Francisco Bay and protection of its wetlands and wildlife. Our organization will be submitting detailed written scoping comments and questions for the environmental impact report to consider and analyze. Our focus will be on the proposed project alternative 3 that would build a 2.65 mile long barrier offshore in the waters of San Francisco Bay. This unprecedented proposal raises serious bay ecological concerns related to bay fill, water quality, sedimentation, and the potential for harmful algal blooms that can kill fish. Tonight, I want to speak to a serious shortcoming in the adequacy and transparency of the public process for this notice of preparation. The NOP that was released on October 10th had a 1-paragraph description of this extremely complex project. On October 13th, I requested that project reports referenced on the OneShoreline website be made available for the public to review in order to make informed and substantive scoping comments for the EIR. Although some of these documents were made available to the public on October 25th, 5 very important project reports weren't posted on the website until 9 o'clock this morning, including the alternatives feasibility analysis. The information in the 5 reports just posted today totals over 500 pages. Although I appreciate the efforts of OneShoreline staff to make these reports available this morning, the public deserves the time and opportunity to adequately review this newly posted project information. For this reason, I respectfully request that the deadline for written comments be extended for an additional 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Next up will be Ken Polton. I'll allow you to speak, and you will have 3 minutes. Go ahead, Ken.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Alrighty. So first off, I think the holistic approach that is being taken here is important, and it's clear that things need to be done in order to protect the built-up areas. What we have I'm a windsurfer and kite surfer. I use Coyote Point quite a bit, and there's quite a lot of us that do. The Coyote Point is the second most popular place for wind sports in the South Bay. It's been used since the 1980s. It's got a wide sand beach that makes it the only beginner-friendly launch in the South Bay. And it's got relatively deep water that makes it the only consistently usable launch in the South Bay. And the beaches and amenities for swimming and water use were just rebuilt there. If you put levees across Coyote Point, an 18-foot levee is going to completely destroy the scenic view of the bay from the 12-foot high bay trail. The area inside in these levees is going to silt up, and it'll quickly become too shallow for swimmers or wind sports. In any event, the wind sports barely use the area that's inside the levee. They just need access to the bay waters further out. Getting to the levee would end up requiring walking through 1,000 feet of silt in order to get out there, and then getting over a riprap levee is quite hazardous. But in the big picture, this levee amounts to bay fill. I can see how this might be cheaper than other alternatives, but this is just filling the bay, not preserving it. The half of the area that's being protected here was illegally filled in the 1960s. This proposal would quadruple the amount of bay that's filled in this area. If anything is done here, if anything is done across Coyote Point, the EIR has to take into account the recreation and figure out how to preserve public access for water sports and safety. I don't see how it's feasible. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Ken. Next up is Geeta Dev. I'll give you permission to talk, and you will have 3 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Good evening, all. Thank you for a good presentation and for explaining the alternatives, which I had not seen before. I do want to say that I'm Geeta Dev. I'm with the Sierra Club Bay Alive campaign, and we are working as advisors to BCDC and also the Plan Bay Area program in figuring out, as they say, how to put nature first in saving the ecology of the bay as sea levels rise. We are very concerned with alternative 3, as was pointed out by some of the others. We believe that it'll severely affect the hydrology of the bay and could very well result in filling in part of the bay, which is something we stopped in 1950. I do want to also point out that while we really appreciate McKenna Wong's informing us that documents would be available today, particularly the alternatives analysis, I do feel that it's a reasonable request to extend the date for the NOP comments to allow us to read them. Because I did try to read them, it's dense and it's going to take a while. So I do request an extension of the time, at least 2 weeks. I have a few questions that I hope can be clarified before the comments are due. One of them is that in looking at the DivCo West project along the shoreline, they pointed out that their property was not the only property, that there was another property which was submerged property within the bay. So I would ask that you clarify whether this the line, that the dotted line that's shown for the rock barrier is on private property or on state lands property, or to clarify whose property it is on. I'd also like to know which agencies have been consulted so far. I know that the Water Board, the Army Corps, BRRIT, and BCDC are all going to have to voice their concerns and opinions about this. So I'd like to know whether they've already been consulted or they are yet to be consulted. Another item is I'd like to know whether the orange line in alternative 3 along the shoreline, is that a levee or is that just the trail on the ground? And finally, I'd like to know if there are going to be more technical studies during 2024 in the 1 year that will be released to the public. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Geeta. Next up will be Audrey Park. I'll give you the ability to talk now. You'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening. I'm Audrey Park, Environmental Affairs Manager at San Francisco International Airport. I'm here to provide comments on the scope of the EIR for the proposed project. As McKenna mentioned, SFO and Shoreline has coordinated for some time on shoreline protection from sea level rise and climate change, and our collective preference has been to tie into each other's systems to cumulatively protect the inland. The airport agrees and believes this to be an important common goal. However, we are disappointed that there has been no discussions or outreach to the airport about this project, which is now the subject of an EIR. The airport urges OneShoreline to discuss the project with the airport and members of the public before proceeding any further, especially as OneShoreline is proposing a project where most of the project would be on property owned by the city and county of San Francisco, operating SFO. Creating new wildlife habitat so close to the airfield does not comply with national FAA rules and regulations meant to keep the traveling public from harm. Actively creating wildlife habitat would attract birds, which pose a significant safety hazard to aircraft taking off and landing at the airport and to the wildlife. A bird strike that disables an engine could cause catastrophic loss of human life. Number 3, the EIR should analyze the project's impacts on existing biological resources, including sensitive natural communities. Creating a new tidal lagoon would flood a known and existing shoreline habitat for the California Ridgeways rail, which is a federally endangered and state fully protected species. So the EIR should address how would this impact be addressed? How would the tidal marsh and species habitat be mitigated? They live in tidal marsh that provides natural flood protection and not in an inundated lagoon. The offshore barrier could include a pedestrian trail that presents serious safety and security concerns for the traveling public. The EIR should discuss how and where the access to the trail would be provided, how frequently the trail would be maintained, and who would be responsible for that work. The EIR should analyze the project's construction-related air quality impacts on adjacent and nearby sensitive receptors, including construction activities and marine vessels that are known sources for construction emissions. The project could alter the shoreline and affect the bay's coastal hydraulics. Hydrodynamic modeling and wave modeling should be conducted to quantify changes to the bay's coastal hydraulics. And based on the modeling results, the EIR should analyze the project's impacts related to sediment transport and the bay's bed elevation and water quality. The EIR should also analyze the operational and maintenance impacts of such a lagoon and levee system, such as looking at how much sedimentation would be outflowing into this lagoon from stormwater carrying urban runoff from the cities. How often would this lagoon need to be dredged? Lastly, the EIR should address project alternatives that are located entirely off of property owned by the city and county of San Francisco. The city maintains bayside land to securely operate SFO and to safely accommodate the traveling public. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Yes, thank you, Andre. Next up is Jay Courtney. I will now allow you the ability to speak, and you will have 3 minutes.
Hi, yes, my name is Joyce Courtney. I'm a Burlingame resident, and I'm speaking on behalf of Sequoia Audubon, the San Mateo County chapter of the National Audubon Society. Sequoia Audubon will be submitting a formalized letter once we have time to complete the review of the large number of documents that were only provided within the last week. We would, however, like to make the comment tonight that the draft EIR needs to address the impact that this project will have on the shoreline, tidal marsh, and associated mudflats, which are an important and essential habitat for migratory and resident shorebirds and waterfalls, specifically during September through April. The biological resources constraints analysis prepared by Rincon Consultants is inadequate and studied the habitat in July, which is the least biologically diverse time of the year, whereas it is critical to note that 166 species of birds have been reported and recorded on the Millbrae and Burlingame shorelines on eBird, which is a collaborative scientific-based enterprise managed by Cornell University Lab of Ornithology. On a personal note, on my own behalf, my questions are, it appears that Rincon has only identified the habitat and the potential species that might appear in the affected area without including a meaningful impact statement. I also have concerns regarding sedimentation, as the presence of sedimentation in the intertidal zones would interfere with photosynthesis and affecting the bottom of the food web, microscopic algae, diatoms, etc. The EIR needs to address how the project will affect the habitat, the creeks, the tidal zones, the seagrasses, everything that is a critical part of the ecosystem that, if imperiled, would directly affect birds and other wildlife. Is OneShoreline and Rincon working with or will be working with local specialists such as ornithologists, conservation biologists, and other appropriately qualified resources? I also would respectfully request that the amount of time to submit the public comment is extended another 2 weeks. As stated, the amount of documentation, while we are grateful for all of this, has only been provided either this morning or within the past week, and it is quite a bit to review. So thank you very much for taking the time to bring us this presentation this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. Before we move on to the next commenter, I just wanted to bring up, because it's been brought up a few times, that the reports that were posted are just about existing conditions in the area and for the project area. So that's why impacts aren't assessed yet, because that's what we are starting right now during this period today, is and we'll be doing over the next quite a few months, is the actual impact analysis on all these various topics that we are addressing today. So with that, thanks for the next comment.
Thanks for that clarification, Kelsey. And thank you, Joyce, for your comments. Next up is Anthony. I'll now give you the permission to speak. You will have 3 minutes.
Thank you. This is Anthony Del Balso. I'm a resident in San Mateo County. I also am a wind sport enthusiast that does use Coyote Point, as well as was commented on from earlier commenters. I have concerns about the project in general. It seems like a pretty massive impact on the bay. Again, I also feel like it essentially fills in the bay. When you're thinking about in the future, a 50% closure time, it's incredibly reduced tidal action. I also recognize it's a very challenging situation we are facing, and appreciate everybody's hard work to come up with alternative solutions. I would love to see more insights into why the second alternative was deemed insufficient or not worth recommending continued looking at. The other thing that I haven't heard mentioned tonight, I'm also a fisherman, and there is a lot of recreational fishing happening along this shoreline, as well as in Coyote Point. We've got a local herring fishery, and while it's largely focused up in the North Bay, there has been historically herring fishery in the area just offshore of Coyote Point there, in the area that the optional extension to Coyote Point would essentially restrict perhaps those herring from reaching those areas for spawning. That could have a major impact on the fishery. So, I'm concerned about the recreational fishery, natural habitat impacts, as well as impacts on both bay users and residents in the area and travelers during construction. So thank you for bringing this to the group tonight.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Anthony. Next up is Maria Zlatnik. I'll now give you the permission to speak. You will have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Maria Zlatnik. I am a resident of Millbrae and somebody who's concerned about the urgency of dealing with climate change. So I appreciate the OneShoreline proactivity in addressing this. And, we lost some of our Millbrae community a couple of years ago with one of the big storms and the flooding that happened near El Camino. So I appreciate working on this, and I have 2 things that I'm hoping the plan will address. One is the issue of environmental justice. Even though they're not major environmental justice communities in the Millbrae Burlingame area, there are definitely communities that are more at risk, and those are oftentimes communities that are otherwise burdened by economic or other hardships. So I'm hoping that the plan will explicitly address environmental justice, and in particular, whether if we do something on our on our area of the bay, is that going to impact, say, the shore in Oakland or somewhere else in the bay? And then my second concern is I'm hoping that the environmental impact report will look at the data that has come out of UC Berkeley's Toxic Tides project, looking at the risk of toxic chemicals that have been buried underground at various places around the bay, and whether those chemicals will be released into either the bay water itself or potentially otherwise impact humans or animals with rising seawaters, and will this proposed plan change or impact which toxic chemicals might potentially get released? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Yes, thank you for your comments. I will now make an announcement for last call for comments. We have one last speaker remaining right now, Evan Adams. I will give you the permission to speak. You will have 3 minutes.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call tonight. First off on this, I really believe that notice was insufficient on this project. OneShoreline did not put it in their meetings and agendas area on their website. You had to dig and find it under events. That's inappropriate. The meeting should be re-agendized properly in a normal format and re-agendized. Further, the document dump that has happened provides insufficient time for interested parties to review. Specifically on this project, I'm calling to you from Foster City, where our lagoon beaches are some of the most polluted in the state. One of the mistakes Foster City has made in the past was not doing proper wind studies for future development on that affects recreation on our lagoons. Further, what is needed on this project is full hydrodynamic studies, full circulation studies, full sediment studies, and proper mitigations for such effects of those things on our bay. Further, the California Water Quality Monitoring Council has not been updating the Coyote Point test results regularly. They should be consulted. Are new test sites needed as a result of this project? How will they be monitored? Is San Mateo County going to pay for those test sites? And the risks of coliform, E. coli, fecal buildup, and other such risks should also be studied in terms of water quality for any adjustments to that shoreline. Further, I would ask that the sound effects of such a project on the residents of Millbrae and Burlingame be examined in relation to SFO and the noise coming out of SFO. Should this project go forward, a study should be done on the increased development that might happen along the shoreline and the resulting housing development impacts that would need to happen elsewhere to meet that moment. Increased development might also affect the recreational wind patterns of the lagoon, and that should be studied. The effect on the economy should also be studied. Should this project prevent SFO's desired future expansions? And most importantly, for all of these effects, they need to not be for now, they need to not be for 10 years, but they need to be for 50 years out, because these sedimentations, these circulation issues take time to build out, as Foster City has unfortunately realized, and it becomes very expensive to dredge, clean up. It's not just geese, but I guess you should also study migratory birds and Canadian geese. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
At this time, this concludes the attendees intending to speak. I'll turn it back to you, Kelsey.
Do we have another speaker card? Yes, great.
Hi, my name
Hi, I'll let you say your own name then, there, go for it.
Sure. Hi, my name is Joe Teresi. I'm a resident of Millbrae, and I wanted to make a few comments as a user of the Bay Trail. I'm hopeful that under alternatives 2 or 3 that whole experience for users can be enhanced to make it more aesthetically and ecologically pleasing. You know, a lot of times you're right up against the water and the walls and concrete, and so hopeful that the EIR will explore ways to improve the experience for the users by making it more attractive and softer and more ecological. Also, maybe looking at ways to separate the bicyclists and the pedestrians, and look for opportunities to actually set the trail back further away from the water. So that you could maybe then take that space that you've moved back and make that more of an enhancement area. along the shore. Also maybe looking at ways to have more like overlooks and fishing piers and stuff like that. And then I'm thinking that it would be good to look at who's going to be ending up maintaining all this new infrastructure. Since it's in multiple jurisdictions, it's not clear who's going to be responsible for eventually operating and maintaining it. So that should be examined as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Joe. Last call for anyone online or in the room for public comments. Okay, with that, thank you very much for participating. We very much appreciate it and your input. Again, written comments through November 15th. If you have any questions, please hang out afterwards and we can try to answer some clarification questions. And thank you very much. That officially closes this EIR public scoping meeting. Have a good evening.
Thank you.